Okay, good morning, everybody. So we're on Beitzah Daf Yud Alef Amud Bet. You saw the Mishnah yesterday. The Mishnah that says Beit Shammai Amrim En Misalkin Et HaTrisim B'Yom Tov Beit Hillel Matzin Av Lachzir. Okay, we're going to go into a little bit more detail today in terms of these Trisim, precisely what they are and what form they take, because the Gemara is going to say it depends on how the Trisim are shaped, may make a difference in terms of whether you can use them or not. But essentially, there is a machloket. These are the shutters on the shops. Machloket whether you can take them off and put them back on Yom Tov. What we saw was that this is related to the idea of itiru sofan mishum tchilatan. That the fact is that Beit Hillel allows not just to take off not just to remove the trisim, which is maybe more understandable, but the fact that they say matirin af lachzir, that you can even put them back, where there is no need to do that for the sake of Simchat Yom Tov. That's just to close up shop. But if you don't allow people to close up shop, they won't come to open up shop either. So that is the idea. What Ula told us, that we have three halachot and maybe four, maybe others as well, but three that he mentions that are related to etiru sofan mishum tchilatan. And you remember Rashi told us that these are to do with Simchat Yom Tov. That's really only the first two, because the third was something else. So let's just pick it up in the Gemara, the second line of the Gemara, from where the Gemara starts after the Mishnah. Says Ola, there are three things which we allow sofan mishum tchilatan. Elohen, or lifnei adolsan, v'trisei chaniyot v'chazarat ertiyah b'mikdash. Right. So the first two, which we've already seen in the Mishnayot, the first was or lifnei adolsan. Right. This was the skin that you put down when people are going to walk. Says Rashi, or lifnei adolsan hutra shtichatan mishum shchitatan. Okay, bit of a play of words, an anagram there, but you allow the skin to be placed out in order so that people won't avoid doing shchita. I've mentioned already many times. Nowadays, practically speaking, and really halachically speaking, because we have different methods of storage of meat, and we don't eat meat the same day that it's shechted, it actually would not be permitted in our days to perform shchita on Yom Tov. Again, unless there are very, very extenuating circumstances. So that was one case. Second case, Trisei Chanuyot, right? That's our Mishnah, what we've just seen. Says Rashi, Hutra Chazaratan Mishum Silukan, right? But Hillel allows us to put these Trisim, these shutters, back on the shops in order that you'll come to take them off in the first place. And the third case was not to do anything with Yom Tov, but this would apply on Shabbat or Yom Tov, but it would be chazarat retiyah b'mikdash. In the mikdash, for a kohen to put back on this retiyah, which is a type of bandage. We explained yesterday that if he wears it, when he's wearing this bandage, it's going to be a chatzitza between him and when he's doing the avodah, and therefore he has to take it off. To take it off, there's no problem. To take it off, there's no isur, and that's necessary for the avodah. But putting it back on is not necessary for the avodah. But we're concerned that if we say you can't take the bandage off, you can't put it back on, so then he won't take it off in the first place. And then this kohen will miss out on performing the avodah. So I saw here an interesting question in the Chashukei Chemed. He says like this, Rav Zilberstein. He says, that's not it. Yeah, so here's the question. He was asked, Teshela, Kohen Cholani. You have a Kohen who is sick, is weak, whatever it is. Amatnet aliyato ladukhan, bitnai sheyizgalu hachalonot kadei shelo yitztanen. Right? So this is something which apparently is quite common, that you have fights in shuls. Open the windows, don't open the windows, close the windows, turn on the aircon, it's too hot, it's too cold, etc. So the way the shul was built is that this Kohen is going to go up to the dukhan, but the window, it's near the windows, which are open. He's afraid he's going to get sick. It's very stuffy, and they don't want to close the windows. Okay, I don't envy the rabbi or the gabbai, whoever has to decide over there. But essentially, the case it was that the Kohen wants the windows closed, and they want the windows open. And he says, if you don't open the windows, I'm not going up to do Birkat Kohanim. And they say, okay, we've got enough Kohanim without you. There's lots of Kohanim here today. You don't have to go. So are they required to close the windows so that he can go up to the Duchan? So he says, quotes our Gemara, נאמר מסכת ביצה דף י"א עמוד ב', אמר ולהגים הדברים יתירו סופן משום תחילתן, right? This is what Ula said, the three things that we allow, סופן משום תחילתן, this is one of them, חזרת הרתיעה במקדש. And Rashi explained, we saw Rashi yesterday, it's Piresh Rashi, Kohen שלקה בידו, you have a Kohen who was injured in his hand, וצריך לעבוד עבודה, וליטול הרתיעה מעל ידו, in order to perform the עבודה, so he needs to remove this bandage. שלא תהיה חציצה בידו לעבודה. So it won't be a חציצה. מחזיר אותי על העבודה, לא אפשר לי להחזירה לו שקילה מעיקר עד כמה שנות. Right? That's what we just explained. We saw yesterday in Rashi. That if you don't allow him to put it back on, he won't take it off in the first place. Now in Eruvin, quotes another Gemara which discusses this as well, or Sif. Over there, Rashi adds something else. He says, "The ilo shalit leilach zira lo shaki leimide." Right? If you don't allow him to put it back on, he won't take it off. Right? Just mentioned, by the way, all of these dinim we're talking about. What's being allowed is a din d'Rabbanan. It's din d'Oraita, so then that's a bit more complicated. But it's a din d'Rabbanan. So Rabbanan can say they say amru ve'amru. They said it's mutar. Here they say it's asur. And then he says umimna v'lo avid avodah. That he'll come to he won't take it off. And therefore he won't do the avodah. So he says, "Arei dechazal shakdu shekol kohen yuchal lavod b'Beit HaMikdash." You could have said, right? What's the big deal? We don't want people to get confused. We don't want people to be transgressing. Let a different kohen do it. There's enough kohanim in the Beit HaMikdash. No, we want to allow. We see that Chazal took efforts to ensure that every kohen that's possible could serve in the Beit HaMikdash. Even though there are many other kohanim without him. Nonetheless, we want to allow it for every kohen to perform it. And therefore, over here in this case, he says they should close the windows. He says, he says, what also, you have mitzvah of arvut. That so interesting question is somebody who's not a kohen, would they have any element of arvut in the mitzvah of birkat kohanim because they're not mechuyav? But in any event, so he says the kohen, he has the mitzvah of, at least for the other kohanim, there's an idea of arvut, that he has the mitzvah of birkat kohanim, and therefore he should close the windows. Okay, I suppose in that case you could close the windows, and once birkat kohanim is finished, you could open the windows again. All right. So that's just an interesting contemporary question that relates to our Gemara. So back inside.
Sorry, Rabbi, Kenigsberg.
Yes.
The Ritiyah, what is the problem with the Ritiyah? It's because there's some liquid in them and there's some cream inside.
Yes. So again, I don't know exactly what it looks like, but the understanding is it comes up a number of places in the Gemara. It's some sort of a bandage. It has some sort of ointment or some sort of cream in it as well. And then when you place it on, you're going to be smearing up that cream. And Rashi told us that is related to the melacha of mimachik, of smoothing out. If you see Rashi, it says chazarat retiyah. He quotes the Gemara, says amra memarech retiyah b'Shabbat chayav mishum mimachik. So you are sort of smoothing out the cream when you place on this bandage. I don't know exactly what it looks like, but that seems to be it. And I mentioned yesterday that this is a contemporary shadow when it comes to creams and all sorts of things. So there's one question in terms of just refuah b'Shabbat. Generally speaking, we have a question of if it's pikuach nefesh, or if a person has regular medication or something like that, so they should continue taking that on Shabbat. That there's no issue. But a person who is what's called mechush ba'alma, Chazal made a gzera against taking medicine or any form of medical treatment for somebody who is not sick, right? Somebody who is sick and needs it, even if it's not pikuach nefesh, is allowed to take medicine on Shabbat. But somebody who just has a very, very slight, a little bit of a headache, but it's not serious. It's again what's called the mechush ba'alma. It's not really going to affect your functioning. So there, Chazal made a gzera. The gzera was gzera mishum shchikat samamanim. In those days, when you took medicine, you didn't necessarily go to what did they do? They had herbs and leaves and all sorts of things which they would ground together to make the medicine. And since grinding is av melacha of Shabbat, Chazal said, no, you can't do it. So there's discussion as to nowadays, the gzera of shchikat samanim doesn't really apply anymore, right? No, we're not worried that anyone's going to go and grind their own medicine. You're just going to go and take the pills from the pharmacy. But nonetheless, that's the gzera that exists, and therefore, under default circumstances, we are still concerned for it. So there's one case of medicine on Shabbat, but assuming that a person needs it, or we're not transgressing that issue of taking medicine on Shabbat. So then the question when it comes to creams and things is memareach, memachek, etc. So I mentioned yesterday that if it's completely absorbed in the skin, that would not be prohibited. If it's a very thick sort of liquid and it's you're spreading it on and it's not absorbed, that's going to be more of a question, and that seems to be what the what this Ritiyah is talking about. Okay, so those are the three cases which Ula quotes, where he says Sofan Mishum Tchilatan, and now we have a fourth case, which the Gemara adds. It will discuss later on why Ula didn't mention this himself, but it says Varachva Amar Rabbi Yehuda Afa Potech Chavito Matchil Bisato Al Gav HaRegel. So somebody has a barrel of wine or a challah or something like that, which they want to open on, Yom Tov and start selling it. So what's going on here? So again, in the days of the Gemara, we essentially had two types of people. You have what's called a chaver and what's called an amaretz. A chaver is somebody who's very, very careful about the laws of Tumah and Tara. Okay, these laws are not really well, they're not practically applicable nowadays. That's why it's very, very confusing, all the dinim of Tarot. But in the days when you had the Beit HaMikdash, so you have to be very, very careful in terms of what you come into contact with and what you eat, etc. So chaver is somebody who's careful about the laws of Tum'ah and Tahara, and he makes sure that he's going to eat everything in Tahara. And Amei Haaretz were not so careful. And therefore, Chazal made Gezerot. And Chazal made certain Gezerot about things which Amei Haaretz comes into contact with. It's going to cause Tum'ah, etc. Now, when it comes to the Shlosha Regalim, so the din was that in Yerushalayim, everything was tahor, that there was no tum'ah from the Amaretz. Chazal made it that on Olei HaRegel, we wanted everybody to be able to eat together, and therefore there was no tum'ah of Amaretz. Everything was considered to be tahor. So the case is, if somebody has a barrel of wine, which they open on the regel, they open on Yom Tov, we're talking in Yerushalayim, and they sell it, and the Amei Haaretz come and they partake of this wine as well, and they take it from there and they come into contact with it, and you have some of it left over after the Chag. So that which is left over after the Chag, so the din of that there's no tumah from the contact with the Amei Haaretz, that only applies on the Chag itself. Do we now say that the rest of that barrel is tahor to be used after the Chag or not? So here is Rachva Mar Rabbi Yehuda says we still consider it tahor, and you can still have the rest of it. And the reason is tiru sofan mishum tchilatan, because if people are going to be thinking, oh, I'm going to open up this wine on the regel on the Amei Haaretz, and everybody can have it and they can come into contact, but there's not going to be any tumah. But what's going to happen once Yom Tov is over? And the rest of it's going to be tameh and have to throw it away. So I'm not going to open it in the first place. So that's what he's saying. That's why we allow it. So let's see Rashi. Rashi over here says, Afa potech et chavito. Potech et chavito. He says, chaver, kshe'etchil limkor yeino, o kikaro le'olei regalim beregel. Right, so he starts to sell his goods, his wine or his bread, to the olei regalim on Yom Tov. Umamash mesheba yadako. Everybody's coming and picking it up and touching it, etc. V'tumata ma'aretz beregel tola. Kol yomot haregel. That's the tum'ah of an Amei Haaretz that does not apply on the regalim. There, at that point, everything is tahor. The question is, what happens with that which is left over after the Chag? So in the Gemara and Chagiga, we have a machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim as to what is the status of that which is left over after the Rega. Rabbi Yehuda omer yigmor v'yimkalen ala chaverim. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, it's all fine, it all stays tahor. He can go and he can complete it, and he can sell it to a chaver, ulekol adam, and to anybody. V'yizaher shelo yiga ma'aretz od. Then he should be careful now, from now onwards, the end of the regular, that the Amei Haaretz shouldn't come and touch it, so as not to cause tumah. But until then, it's fine. The Chachamim omrim lo yigmor v'lo yimkalenu od. Mishum didn't make belega v'magama aletz. And Chachamim say no, you can't sell the rest of it because now it's considered ta'or because the Aretz came and they were touching it all over Yom Tov. It's only what we said. There's no tumah. That's only on the Yom Tov itself. But once the regel's over, so no. Right, and even though all the days of the Chag of the regel it was allowed, so that you wouldn't cause any embarrassment. After the regel, this is Chachamim. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, but this is what Chachamim they say. After the regel, that the tumah comes back. Now, again, we're talking about tumat ama'aretz, i.e., the tumah that we're dealing with. It's not that we have any definite that we know that somebody was tameh and came into contact with it, but this is tumat ama'aretz that Chachamim made xerah because they are not necessarily careful. Vashmeina nachva de Rabbi Yehuda lo amal yigmol ela mishum tchilatan, and Rachva is telling us the reason Rabbi Yehuda said you can finish it, you can complete, you can sell the rest of this wine or bread, right, is because of the svara of mishum tchilatan. If we wouldn't allow it at the end, so then you wouldn't have opened it up in the first place. You would have saved all your wine because you don't want to lose your money. Okay, so those are the four cases. So that was just back in the Gemara. It says Rachva Amar Rabbi Yehuda Afopedeh Chavito Matchil Besato Agav Alegel V'aliba de Rabbi Yehuda. Right, that's only going to be according to Rabbi Yehuda. According to Chachamim, Chachamim do not say in that case Hitiru Sofan Mishum Tchilatan. They don't allow it. Okay, so now going through the three cases that we've already said, the question is, what's the chiddush in what Ula is telling us? Meaning, certainly the first two cases of Alef Ne'adosan and the Trisin, we've already seen them. We've already seen them in the Mishnayot, and we know that it's mutar. So why does Ula have to tell us, and why do we need the svara of Hitiru Sofan Mishum Tchilatan? So says the Gemara. Alef Ne'adosan. Okay, so we are now, I guess, 7 lines before the lines start to get a bit wider. So, Olif Ne'adosan, Tanina, that we've already learned. We've already learned the din of Olif Ne'adosan in the previous Mishnah. That was Beit Hillel. So why does it say it again? Ma'ud Tema, Tamayu de Beit Hillel Mishum de Chazi Lemizgalayu, Va'afilo Me'elav Yom Tov Nami. So you would have thought the following. I needed to tell you that Alef Ne'adosan is dependent on the svara of Hitiru Sofan Mishum Tchilatan for the following reason. You would have thought, as the Gemara already explained, that Beit Hillel's reason was Mishum Zachazi Lemizgalei. Remember that these skins are not muktzeh because you can use them to sit on them, to lean on them. And therefore, so you would have said, well, if that's the reason, then Afilo Me'erev Yom Tov Nami. Then if Beit Hillel is saying, really, it's not muktzeh, then even if the shechita had been done before Yom Tov, just before, so then on Yom Tov as well, you could do it. So Kama Shmalan, therefore Ula comes to teach us no. Hitiru Sofan Mishum Tchilatan, the Yom Tov in, the Elev Yom Tov lo. Right? No, so essentially it's a combination of both factors. A combination of the fact that ultimately it's not really muktzeh because you could use it to sit on, but also we only bring that into consideration because of the din of Simchat Yom Tov. And therefore, if you had, if the shechita had been done before Yom Tov, then no, then we don't allow, because it could have been done much earlier, you could have done something else with the skin, and therefore we wouldn't allow it. Okay, Kamash Malan, Yitir Sofam Mishum Tchilatan, Yom Tov in, the Elev Yom Tov lo. So that was case number 1. Case number 2, Trisei Chanuyot, Nami Tanina. Right, you're telling me, Ula, about the trisim, you can put the shutters back on the shops. Well, that we already know. Beit Hillel matirin aflachzir. That's what it said in our Mishnah. So ma'ud tema tama'ud Beit Hillel mishum de'ein binyan b'kelim ve'ein stira b'kelim va'afilu tebatim nami. Again, you would have thought in both these cases, what we're saying is you would have thought that Beit Hillel had a shvara independent of Hitiru Sofan Mishum Tchilatan. And that would have been enough reason to be lenient in any case. So yeah, you would have said what? Well, Beit Hillel is allowing it, we've already mentioned, because ein binyan b'kelim ve'en stira b'kelim. The malacha d'oraita of binyan and soter is only applies something that is connected to the ground. But when it's saying not connected to the ground, which is kelim, then there is no isur d'Rabbanan, no isur d'oraita. There could still be isur d'Rabbanan, but there is no isur d'oraita. And therefore, since that is permitted, you might say afilu debatim nami. If you have trisim in your house, i.e., it's got nothing to do, according to the Hava Amina here, it's got nothing to do with the fact that these trisim are for the sake of giving people food in the shops for Simchat Yom Tov. You would think because it's ein binyan b'kelim, you could do it anywhere. So kamash malan, therefore comes to teach us, no. Hitiru sofan mishum tchilatan. I need a svara of hitiru sofan mishum tchilatan. And therefore, the chanuyot in the batim lo. And therefore, when it comes to shops, that's where it's allowed. But in houses or somewhere else, where it's not necessary, at least the tchilatan, for the sake of Simchat Yom Tov, then that would not be allowed. Just mention, because we're talking about binyan and stira and binyan b'kelim, so it's very, very interesting. One of the modern common applications, perhaps, of the malacha of binyan is when it comes to the discussion regarding electricity on Shabbat. So the first poskim to discuss this, going back at the beginning, was there was the Beit Yitzchak, Rabbi Yitzchak Shmelkes. I think we've mentioned in this shiur in the past. He said that using electricity on Shabbat was a prohibition of molid. I'm not going to go into all the details now, but it's prohibition of molid, which is an isur d'Rabbanan. And very famously, the Chazon Ish was the one who said, no, he thinks that electricity is part of the malacha of boneh, of building. When you close a circuit, said you are building something there, you're attaching it, and therefore that would be an isur d'oraita, right? Whether the Chazon Ish, there's a lot of speculation as to whether, and a lot's been written about whether the Chazon Ish intended it to be that this is really within the parameters of the malacha of boneh. Again, into a lot of today's electrical circuits, it works in a different way to what he was talking about, and therefore that may not apply. Or he meant to say there's maybe sort of a mita halachic perspective here, which is that using electricity is a melacha chashuva. Whether we call it poneh, whether we call it something else, is irrelevant. But he wanted to say that it's isur d'oraita. That, for example, is the position of Rav Moshe Weiss. Rav Moshe Weiss has tshuvot where he says that he thinks that electricity is a makeh b'patish, i.e. that it's actually the Yerushalmi that talks about Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, how they learned Malachot Shabbat. And they learned Malachot Shabbat actually opposite to the way that we learn it. Right? The way we learn it is we look at the Malacha, and we look at the definition of the Malacha, and then we say, does a certain action fit into a category A or B or C, or which one of the 39 Malachot? So the Yerushalmi says that Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish went around, they looked at all these significant actions that people do, all the significant, what we would probably call malachot colloquially and not halachically. And they said, okay, these are important actions, these must be forbidden. They must fit into one of the categories of malachot. Where do they fit in? And anywhere where they couldn't find a category where it could fit in, so they said, that's makeh b'patish. Meaning that makeh b'patish is just a significant action, doesn't necessarily fit into another category. That's the way he learns that Yerushalmi. And based on that, says Rabbi Shavais, that therefore operating electricity is a d'oraita. Not everybody agrees. With the Chazon Ish, who used this boneh, there are a number of letters between Chazon Ish and Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Rav Shlomo Zalman argued against him, and he said that, no, it should be a isur d'Rabbanan. Generally speaking, nowadays, we assume that electricity is, we rely on, we are concerned, we're choshesh for the fact that it may be d'oraita, but in cases of need, in terms of medical need, security need, etc., we do rely on the opinions, and there are many that it is isur d'Rabbanan. Okay, so that's just an interesting point about electricity connected to binyan. That's our subject here, and then we get to the third case. So back in the Gemara it says. We're now in the wide lines. It says Ratiyah b'mikdash. That case also we have that taught elsewhere. Tanina machzin Ratiyah b'mikdash avalo b'medina. So the writer says as follows. It says that you can put the Ratiyah back in the mikdash, but not in the Medina. So Medina means outside the mikdash. So if this is a din that's just connected to the Beit HaMikdash, you might have thought the following. You might have thought Mauda Teima Tama Mai Mishum De'en Shvut b'mikdash. Right, we have a principle that inside the mikdash, anything which was forbidden because of a shvut, anything which Rabbanan said you can't do on Shabbat, they did not apply those restrictions inside the mikdash itself. And therefore, you might have thought, since this is a shvut, afilu kohen delav bal avodahu, that it applies to anybody. It applies to even a kohen who's not going to be performing the avodah, but simply for the reason that it's a shvut, and therefore it's allowed. So says, Ula comes to teach us, kama shmalan, hitiru sofan mishum tchilatan, devar avodah id, delav bal avodah lo. I.e., this is related to the fact of the performing the avodah. No, it's not enough that it's a shvut in the mikdash, but it's only if it's a kohen who needs it and he needs to, and therefore he needs to take it off to perform the avodah. He can put it back on, but nobody else. Okay, now the fourth case, which Ola did not mention but was added on as well, where we said lo potech et chavito. Sorry, devar avodah in, devar avodah lo. Okay, potech et chavito, again opening this barrel of wine that was opened on the rega to use it afterwards. Nami tanina, that's a Mishnah. That's where he's quoting it from, right? Apotech et chavito umatchil beisato agav alegel. Rabbi Yehuda omer yigmor v'chachamim omrim lo yigmor. So we saw that in Rashi before. Rabbi Yehuda says you can carry on, you can sell the rest of this wine after Yom Tov. We're not concerned. Chachamim are concerned. So that's already mentioned there. Why do I need to now come and say that it's because of the svara of hitir sofan mishum tchilatan? So you need to, for the following reason, ma'udatema tumat ha'ma'aretz beregel ketala shavyu al rabanan ve'af agav de lo etchil nami. So you would have thought the following: when we said that the tumat ha'ma'aretz is allowed on the regel, so you would have thought that it's not just because of in the way that we've done it, in the way so as not to cause embarrassment and to allow people to eat together, etc. You would have thought that they uprooted it completely and katarash of your rabbanan, and they made it a completely tower, and that would mean that even if you didn't open and start selling this wine, but that Amei Aretz already came into contact with it, nonetheless it would still be permitted. According to Rabbi Yehuda. So kama shmala no, hitiru sofan mishum tchilatan, hitchil in, lo hitchil lo. The reason I have to tell you, sofan mishum tchilatan, is that only if they had begun to open it and to sell it, then it's going to be permitted, according to Rabbi Yehuda, but if not, not. And now the Gemara just says, why did Ula not bring this case in the first place? Ula maitama lo amalha. Right, Ula, you remember Ula mentioned the three cases, and then Rachva came and brought the fourth case. So he says, he didn't bring cases that are machloket. Ula wanted to come and teach us all the cases where hitirus ofan mishum tchilatan, according to everybody. But the cases that are there's a machloket about, there's a machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim. He didn't mention that. Wait a minute, you'll all shout out at me. What do you mean he didn't bring cases that don't have machloket? The first two Mishnayot exactly were a machloket Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. Says the Gemara here something fascinating. He says, Anach nami plukta, these are also cases of machloket. Say no. Beit Shammai b'mkom Beit Hillel eina Mishnah. Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, there's not a machloket. Meaning that where you have the opinion of Beit Hillel, that is, since we go 99% of the time, we go along with Beit Hillel and not like Beit Shammai. So that is something which is obvious, and that's something which is accepted. We don't consider the words of Beit Shammai to be a Dvar Mishnah in the place of Beit Hillel. Let's see, was there? I thought Rashi said something on that. Apparently not. Okay. All right, so we'll stop there. The next section, now the Gemara goes into a little bit more detail in terms of the trisim, whether they have a tzir or they don't have a tzir, and a few contradictory braitot that seem to be about that. But I guess we'll pick that up next time, and then we'll get into the next Mishnah, which gets into some of the very, very fundamental principles of Melechet Ochal Nefesh and Mitoch, and when you can do Melacha on Yom Tov, when you can't. So it's very exciting. So stay tuned for that next week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.